Hypocrisy is an excellent narrative tool that needs to be handled with care. Making a character a hypocrite can serve quite a few purposes, both characterization and narrative-wise. For example, making a character initially hypocritical, only for them to realize said hypocrisy and rise above it, makes for an excellent and satisfying character arc, such as Thorfinn from Vinland Saga. You can also take things in the opposite direction, though, making a character more hypocritical as the series progresses, making them either into a full-blown villain, such as Jujutsu Kaisen Suguru Geto, or Death Note's Light Yagami, or make them blur the line between hero and anti-hero, such as Gon did during Hunter x Hunter's Chimera Ant arc. As mentioned though, hypocrisy must be handled with care. There are few things more annoying than an overtly hypocritical character who's written in such a way to be completely oblivious to it. All the while this obliviousness is never properly narratively contextualized or addressed. Whenever something like this does occur, it is a mark of inexperienced, subpar, or, as it was most likely the case here, rushed writing. A character who's been living rent-free in my head for over a decade now, and who in my mind best encapsulates this notion, is none other than Uchiha Madara. For a man who supposedly wishes to bring about true peace and usher forth a world where only winners exist, having become despondent, dispirited, and disheartened at all the conflict and bloodshed which defined the warring shinobi era of his time, he really seems to goddamn enjoy conflict and bloodshed. No, seriously, the first thing the guy does after getting zombified is charge and massacre a whole army of shinobi who realistically pose no immediate danger to him. These are not the actions of a peacemaker wishing for a world without violence or loss. No, they are the actions of a warrior throwing himself back into the fray of war after decades of inaction. How are we then supposed to square his supposed final wish for mankind with his obvious desire for the very thing he is trying to abolish? We really can't, and this is never really addressed or brought up. Madara's last words to Hashirama tied the bow on the narrative thread of bequeathing one's dreams to the subsequent generation, as an individual, no matter how great, is still limited in the scope of what he can accomplish during his own lifetime. Therefore, one's focus should be on the fostering and nurturing of new generations in the hopes that they will be able to attain, or at least make further steps in attaining, the collective ideal set before them. In this case, peace. Something that Madara, who opted for control and manipulation instead of encouragement and education, could never truly accomplish. In the narrative context of Naruto, at least. Now, while this serves as a great way to complete the Will of Fire narrative theme, it fails in actually squaring the blatant incongruity between Madara's ideals and his actions, which, as mentioned, is never properly addressed at any point. Hashirama's and Madara's final exchange channels an almost archetypal scene in Battle Shonen, i.e. that of the villain admitting the error of his ways, while his narrative foil, usually the protagonist, but in this case Hashirama, gives him a send-off by, to a degree, acknowledging his efforts and ideals, but nonetheless affirming their misguidedness. Now, I often find this quite annoying because quite a lot of Battle Shonen tend to do this might is right crap, wherein a villain will at the moment of passing admit the error of his ways simply because they've lost a physical battle with the narrative foil. This is of course because while the physical battle is meant to drive and conclude the plot, the parallel ideological battle is meant to drive and conclude the narrative. Naruto does this very well, wherein Kishimoto establishes very early on the notion of shinobi being able to understand each other's feelings through battle, thereby essentially establishing this plot and narrative interrelation in-world. This serves to make the opponents change their mind upon losing actually sensical and satisfying. But Madara wasn't actually defeated by either his foil or the protagonist, nor should Hashirama give this guy any credit whatsoever in the first place. The dude wants to stop conflict and give people their dreams, whether they like it or not, but would also massacre them in droves for what effectively comes down to flexing. This is also not due to some warrior code of honor or anything of the sort. He not only consistently belittles his opponents, calling the Kage children, but also knows full well that the 99.99999% of the people charging him are not actually a threat, and if he was willing, he absolutely could have either A. subdued them in a non-lethal fashion, which would have made for an even bigger flex, or B. simply not have fought them. These are the people he is looking to save from this unjust world, after all. He is doing this for them, isn't he? Otherwise, he could have simply put himself under an equivalent genjutsu and not bothered with this whole Eye of the Moon plan in the first place. His actions are not only hypocritical, they are borderline nonsensical. Now, you could argue that this hypocrisy is simply one of the key attributes which make him a villain, but as mentioned at the beginning, there are degrees of cognitive dissonance a reader or viewer can be expected to swallow. We're not talking about a character that's a child, a character with deficient or limited mental faculties, someone acting on instinct, or anything of the sort. No matter how resentful or egotistical, Madara was nonetheless in control of his mental faculties, and it really doesn't take a lot of those to see the discrepancy between what he is doing and what his end goal is. He's had years to ponder and meditate on his desires and plans, but nonetheless just casually drops meteors on a whole field of people he is intending to rescue from their own foolishness. It really just makes no sense. To drive this point home, let's briefly analyze what Madara's ideology entails. A. The world is filled with violence and despair. B. This is unjust, but unavoidable and unchangeable, primarily due to the fundamental nature of reality and human free will. As long as there are any form of winners, there must necessarily be losers as well. C. The value of true reality and human free will is less than the value of peace, justice, and individual flourishing. And D. Creating a solipsistic pseudo-reality wherein each individual can be a winner in their own right is worth sacrificing true reality and free will, even through coercion. Now, supposing we take this reasoning as a decent analog for Madara's own, it boggles the mind how someone so concerned with bringing about peace through the propagation of individual bliss would so casually take the lives of others on a massive scale. In my mind, there are two ways, which do not necessarily exclude each other, in which Kishimoto could have handled Madara's character without changing his end goal, both of which I personally find much more compelling. First is to have him avoid fighting unless provoked, and even then resort to using lethal force only when necessary. This unwillingness to take another's life would have complemented his supposed ideology of individual worth and flourishing really well. Second, change Madara's last words to Hashirama. What if instead of simply affirming Hashirama's ideals, he said something like, all according to plan, Hashirama. Wherein he reveals his true plan. As soon as the war had started, Madara had already won. By creating a war, he had made the first step towards attaining peace. Essentially, either A, the Eye of the Moon plan would have succeeded, which would see peace attained at the cost of everyone's free will, a trade-off but one Madara was willing to make, or B, the very shinobi nations would have banded together to successfully stop him. Unlike the Eye of the Moon plan, this would not guarantee peace in the long term, but would also not have had the trade-off of eliminating free will. I believe something like this would have elevated Madara to the status of characters such as Itachi, whose beliefs and actions spark compelling discussion, on occasion, even to this day. That's about that. Whether or not you agree, I do hope you at least found the video interesting. I know I didn't analyze the whole of Madara's character here, I'm fully aware of that. My point was to focus in on this particular flaw of the war arc's writing. You can write a character with a messiah complex, that's completely fine, but that really needs to be contextualized through the other characters and the story proper. Madara's hypocrisy is never challenged, and how an expert in talking no jutsu such as Naruto failed to see a potential in is perplexing. Though I guess he may have simply judged Madara as even more delusional than Obito, which is a burn more powerful than any Blaze release could ever muster. In any case, thank you very much for watching, feedback is always appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.